everyone, this is Dr. Liz, and you're listening to Include with Dr. Liz. This show is about everyone, all people, including you. It's about people and their diverse lived experience in this world. I chat with guests to get to know them, their identities, and their inclusion needs, so we all have an opportunity to understand how best to include them, so together we can create a world where everyone thrives. Lois is a spinach avoiding, bookworming, resilient and determined, and maybe just a little bit stubborn, disability consultant and coach in South Africa. In her work, Lois leverages her lived experience to demystify disability with the ultimate goal of making a positive difference in people's lives. Welcome, Lois.
Thank you, Dr. Liz. It is so exciting for me to be here. I love your show and I've listened to lots of your episodes. So I'm really excited to chat to you today.
First, I want to know about you have published some songs on some streaming services. Tell us about that.
A week after I became blind, I joined a rock band.
As one does.
And as of course one does. And I've always loved music, and I only started playing music after I became blind. I love playing live on stage. It's one of my all-time favorite things. And yeah, my band Tuesday's Child has given me so much fun, so much pleasure, and so much enjoyment.
So I'm now just putting myself in your shoes, right? So I speak on stage and I speak more powerfully and patting myself on the shoulder, more inspired, more connected with the audience, because when I can see them versus doing it online, right? There is this energy I can see and feel. How does that work for you?
You can feel it.
Yeah.
Even if you can't see it. And sometimes I actually think that I've got several advantages not being able to see my audience. I can't see if they're all looking at their phones.
I've had that.
Secondly, there's a kind of a magical energy that you get feedback from an audience that isn't just a scene experience. It's a whole immersive experience, and it is so powerful. Being live on stage has always been two-way communication for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't change.
Yeah. So here we have something in common already, being on stage, and I love learning from a different perspective how someone else, because it's the energy that lifts the performance, right? And
Mhm.
so I love that it can still be felt without seeing it. All right, let's segue on to some inclusion stuff. You completed a questionnaire just like everybody else. Long list of identities. Now, you only ticked one, but I'm going to force you to tell us three, and then we'll talk about why. So what were the three I'm going to make you say?
So if I have to choose three, I would go with female, blind, and I have a chronic condition.
Which for our listeners is diabetes type 1, right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
Now, I, I'm laughing. People don't know why I'm laughing. It's because we both have had this conversation, and here I am going, no, I'm going to make you say the three. But we're on the same page as to why you only wanted to say one. So can you share with us how you actually responded to the questionnaire? Because you only ticked female. Explain to me that.
I don't like being defined
Mm-hmm.
in any way because I think it's limiting, and who I am, the the conditions that impact on me are merely differences.
Mm-hmm.
They affect the way I act in the world, they affect the way I engage with the world, but they do not define me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I work in the disability sector. I work with people who are disabled, and I am disabled. If you are seen as disabled or having a chronic condition, that immediately brings a whole lot of other emotional baggage along with it
Mhm.
that I just do not subscribe to.
Right. So when we talk about how labels can define people, the language of disabled person versus person with a disability. Do you have any opinions on that person first language?
Probably more than we could discuss in a single podcast. To me, I agree with the concept of person first language.
Mhm.
I am a person before I am anything else. But I think it's less about the terminology than it is about the barriers that society places in our way. I wish people would spend as much time solving the problems, breaking down the barriers, as they seem to discussing the right term to use.
Yeah, good one.
And that's a very harsh way of saying it.
We like honesty in this podcast.
We have so many real challenges that we're facing
Mm.
that aren't impacted at all, whether someone calls me disabled, blind, person with a disability, or a person with a visual impairment, or
I hear
nothing
exactly what you're saying.
changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's deal with the big things first and from your point of view. And I could talk to 10 of you and you'll all have, when I say you, just people,
10
and
people.
you'll
Yeah.
all have different perspectives on it.
Sure. And I respect that.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. But it's about the individual person
Mhm.
and their reality,
Yeah.
their lived experience. All that takes is a conversation.
Yeah. Don't give away the clues, Lois. We'll be out of work. If all people did was say to someone else, "How can I make this better for you?" Inclusion solved. Anyway, we'll keep that to ourselves and everyone else that's listening. Can you tell us that journey of losing your sight as an adult?
I suppose the place to start is to say that I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 6 years old. And I don't know whether I didn't know, didn't want to know, didn't listen, just found the experience of living with diabetes was something that I was denying, not engaging with, whatever it was. But I didn't realize that there were long term consequences of living with a condition like diabetes. And as a result of my diabetes, I started developing an eye condition. That when I was 21 years old, I became blind. And that was a direct result of my type 1 diabetes.
How do you deal with that when you're 21? You know, that's just like this pivotal moment in starting life in a young adult's life. How did it impact you?
I've always been the kind of person who's loved problems and puzzles and solving problems.
Mm,
And I went directly into problem solving mode.
mm,
And I think that had some implications on how I adapted and adjusted. I've often been questioned about the emotional impact, and I think that took me a lot longer. And at the same time, living in South Africa, which is it's a country that has a lot of challenges in terms of resources, and particularly when it comes to people living with a disability.
mhm,
I know that I am in a position of privilege. I had the financial support, I had the emotional support, the family, my friends, all, well, almost all gathered around me and supported me. Had access to the blindness skills training centers that I needed, access to eventually the assistive technology that
mhm.
helped me adjust. So I really couldn't have asked for a better situation to manage and confront my new lived experience.
Right, I want to pick up on something that you said, just something, a little moment of all of the support that rallied around you
Mhm.
um, on the most part. of friends. How did it affect some of your relationships? What happened?
A couple of the people closest to me at the time, in terms of my friendships, were unable to, I don't know what the right word is here. Cope with feels a little bit too strong,
Mhm,
but they they struggled with adjusting to my new lived experience. And it hurt at the time,
mhm.
particularly because it was my closest female friend and my then partner. But my eye surgeon actually explained it, put it into a different context for me. He said that often the people closest to you feel very powerless.
Mhm.
They feel overwhelmed and they are uncertain of how to respond. So, for their own safety, their own preservation, they need to step away. How could I turn around and blame somebody for making a decision that was almost certainly to preserve their own peace of mind, their own mental stability?
I mean, that's extremely compassionate on your part when you're the one actually going through the change and most likely needs kind of I say that need trumps preference. It's kind of one of my things that I say. And you had a need in that moment. They might prefer to avoid something uncomfortable, but you had a need. So if we were to give any advice to anyone out there and they have a close friend or a partner that something has happened and there has been a significant change in that moment that's resulted in a disability and we're struggling with it, what advice would you give to us to get over it so we don't need to step away for self preservation and instead lean into it to support you?
It's such a, I can't make that decision for someone else.
Mm.
All I can do is know what I would do if placed in the same situation.
And what would you do?
I would be there,
Mm.
absolutely, completely, but yet not overcrowding and being invasive,
Mhm.
because that can be equally a challenge.
Now, you so confidently say you would be there. And so I'm curious, why is it so important to be there?
For the very few people who did feel the need to step out of my life, most of my friends, most of my family were very much there for me. And I know what a difference that made in my own life.
Mm. So here's the thing, you're sharing how you're compassionate for the excuse. I'm sorry, I can't use the reason. The excuse for the excuse for stepping away. I mean, here's the thing. When we're trying to create inclusion in this world so everyone can thrive, and because my focus is on creating inclusion in organizations, I'm not comfortable with saying that a coworker or a manager or an employer can step away because they're uncomfortable and not sure what to do. So, how do we flip that and talk about that, Lois? Do you think that they have the right to step away as an employer?
No.
Mm.
I might think differently now.
Mm.
In terms of the friendship, I haven't really thought about it from that slightly different context. What is the difference?
Mm.
Why is one okay to me and one absolutely not okay?
And maybe it is the fact that we sign a contract. Maybe it is about the ability to support ourselves and fulfill our potential that feels more not okay.
Being in a work environment where all the parties understand and are capable, and I use that term guardedly, of fulfilling the responsibilities and the
Mm.
tasks
Let's
associated
let's go
with the
with
role.
capacity. They have the capacity, whether
Yeah,
or not they choose to develop the capability to do so.
yes.
Look, I do want to sort of dip into that a bit now. So, in the organizational context, let's think of it at those three layers: the colleague, the manager or supervisor, and the employer. Let's say an employee did have a life-changing thing happen. What advice do you have at those layers on what they can do?
The easy out, and I think it happens far too often, is that the manager and employer goes, this person is no longer able to execute the job that they were hired for.
Mhm,
So therefore, they should be boarded or they should be moved out of the role and possibly, probably out of the organization.
mhm,
That's not helpful. And I think it is challenging to take a better route, which is giving a little space for the newly disabled person to explore what their possibilities are, what is still possible for them, because they're very caught up in that moment of what they're going through
mm,
at the time. And it does take some time to adjust
mhm,
and learn what is possible. Because coming from a position of living as an able bodied person or a non disabled person to then accepting and thriving with a disability, that takes a certain amount of training and
mhm,
skills and knowledge and support and resources and all sorts of different things. But you don't know where to start often.
mm,
So there should be, I'd like to think, that a newly disabled person in a work environment would be given a bit of space to reach out to whomever, wherever they need to get that knowledge,
mm,
those tools. From the management and the employer's perspective, I think there's also an adjustment. There's a learning of what is possible.
mm.
And I think sometimes that's a harder part because knowing and understanding someone else's lived experience can sometimes be a little challenging.
But
Yeah?
here's the thing, Lois, every organization has a customer. And
Yes.
we are expected to put ourselves in the shoes of the customer. What does the customer need? What are their preferences? How do we best meet their needs? So I don't understand the resistance to think, well, why can't we just expect the same of our co-workers?
I would suggest that while you are completely right, I don't know how often a customer with a disability is really taken into consideration by an organization.
Mhm.
People with disabilities are not considered as consumers.
Right.
They're not taken into consideration with the designing, implementation of projects, of products, of campaigns, marketing.
Well, what
Yeah.
do you think the benefits are for an organization if they did make sure that they considered the needs of the diverse lived experiences of people with a disability?
Well, I mean, the very basic one, it increases their potential market.
Hmm.
I think that in itself, is, as a business case, is fundamentally important. I think also very often that if one is designing with inclusion in mind,
Hmm.
that the reality is that it'll make those products, those services more accessible for people not specifically living with a disability or but just generally they improve the products, they improve the services for all stakeholders, all customers.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, with the introduction of text messaging, the original design of that was to support the people that are deaf. And then I don't know if I could live without text messaging now because the anxiety of me seeing a phone number come up on a ringing phone that I don't know, I would much prefer just to expect a text from.
And what I'm finding, I mean, it's just following on from that thought, is the number of sighted people who are using voice messaging as
Mm,
the default. It's
yeah.
the automatic way that they are now doing their messaging. And I always used to think that it was just because I was a blind person that they were going, oh, it's probably easier for Lois to listen to audio messages.
No.
No, it's not always. Um, but that's not the case.
So
I
my
just thought it was.
daughter, she's
Mhm.
25, and she came and stayed with us over Christmas. I didn't see her text a text message the whole time I was here. Instead, she
Mm.
uses the microphone to do voiced to text in
Yes.
all her text messaging. And that technology was not invented for people that are sighted or hearing.
I love stories like that because there's so many different things and people don't realize. Okay, when I talk people there, I mean people without direct contact into the disability sector
Mhm.
don't realize how much of the things that we are doing are directly a result of accommodations that are being made for people living with disabilities. So, audiobooks.
Mm. Quick question. Um, I run teams through workshops on how to inclusively innovate products and services. When they work through my 8 inclusion needs framework, access is number one. And invariably, they'll come up with the solution to meeting the needs of a person that is blind would be Braille. Is that always the case? Is that always the best solution?
No.
Can you help us understand why?
Firstly, if we're talking legal blindness, then many people aren't Braille users.
Mm.
In fact, typically, people who have an acquired blindness, like myself, don't really engage easily with Braille. Of the 285 million legally blind people around the world, I believe that less than 10% are Braille users.
All right. So, as part of the questionnaire, I don't always bring this up in every episode. I just am generally looking for outliers, things that really jump out at me. So, for those that are listening, I send my questionnaire around the 8 inclusion needs. And the first half of it is how are they currently met? So, really strongly, yes, I agree. Those needs are fulfilled in my life so I can thrive. And then the second half is how important is it that those things are being met so that I can thrive? And I just saw here potentially just something to discuss. On the I can always see and hear or understand via alternatives what's being communicated. And you said you agree. So I or someone like me might assume that it's not, that you would have strongly disagreed. So can you help me understand why or how that's being fulfilled for you?
I think for me, a lot of it has to do with context. I'm now working on my own. I control my work environment. I control the work that I do to a very large degree,
Mm,
which means that I have control over my processes, my assistive technology,
mhm,
the solutions I use, and I also have a degree of choice on the content that I consume. There's so much assistive technology available,
mm.
and it's changing on a day-to-day basis. And I mean, even now, can do something that 3 months ago, 4 months ago, I would have said I couldn't do.
Yeah, right. And I love that you mentioned contextual. And it is. It's contextual to the environment that we have around us. And in your case, and I think you've said it already before, the privilege that you have
Mm.
has enabled you to do certain things in life that others may not have been able to have the opportunity to do so. So in
Yeah,
some cases, someone with similar characteristics to you may not have been able to answer so positively because of their own
correct.
context. Now, I do want to go back to assistive technologies for a second because this is a true story that happened this week. So, I'm in the process of teaching myself how to build an app. Okay, so I have a minimum viable product that I've developed. I've popped it onto the app store and I've given it access to 20 friends to play with it. And I was trying to play with it and to see if I turned on the assistive technology of screen reading, would the app still work? Like, would it read out the content of it? So I went into systems, turned on, screen reader. I couldn't work out how to get back out of the system settings to even test the app because I got stuck in a loop because I didn't know how to use it. So I might have to ask for your help, Lois, get you to download the app and tell me, does it read to you by a screen reader? So my capability was very low and tested.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because I've had exactly the same experience. A professional speaker colleague of mine was emceeing
Mhm.
a dinner in the dark event.
Oh, yes.
And he's wonderful about showing the skills, the abilities of people who have different abilities.
Yes.
And he said, I know this is how you use your phone. How do I switch it on? And I said, you do it here, you do it there, you do this, that, and the next thing. And he switched it on and he couldn't switch it off. And nowadays, if people tell me that they want to play with a text to voice application
Mhm.
on their smartphones, I caution them and tell them that they need to learn how to switch it off before they actually switch it on because it does. It changes the way you engage with your phone.
Correct.
And
Which
that
I learned
can
the
cause
hard
some
way.
challenges. Yes.
I got so stuck in the screen. I'm like, how do I get out of this? And then in the end, I had to abort mission. I had to turn it off because I'm like, I knew if I got out of that screen, I'd never get back to it.
Oh,
So
yes.
we could laugh about it, but I promise you I was trying. And if anyone is listening as well, and like I do this for a living, my goal is to not only equip people to be more inclusive, but anything that I provide, I want it to be inclusive as well. It doesn't mean it's easy. I haven't given up, and I did know I was catching up with Lois today, so I'm going to see if she can test it for me.
But and I'm very happy to do so. But you know what? How often do those of us who maybe do engage with content in a
Mm,
slightly different way have the flip side of
mhm,
that experience where we have similar challenges that we have because things aren't inclusive?
mm,
They aren't designed to accommodate our needs. And then people get really, their responses can differ quite widely about thinking they're doing us a favor by making it accessible.
mhm. See, I'm always thinking
It's
about it's well beyond the labels, right? So where I
yes.
talk about, let's say, go back to that question of I can always see and hear or understand via alternatives what's being provided. My
Mhm.
point on that is it doesn't just mean for someone that is uh, sight, hearing, or physically um, facing a barrier, right? When it comes to a disability, it could mean that you consume content on public transport and you don't wear headphones and you want to read it instead of hear it. Um, like, do you know what I mean? Like in it, or for instance, with this podcast, it's not just an audio podcast, it's a video podcast because there are people that can learn better visually by watching the expressions of and body languages of what's being shared. Or for those that may be deaf, they can watch and read the captions. Or someone like me who is not an auditory learner at all. And so I'm more likely to engage with content that is visual versus just audio. So
Hmm.
that's if we approach it from that point of view, that everyone has a vision, a hearing, and a physical access need, then we're taking it beyond just the label.
I think the biggest challenge that we face is that people see different as being less.
Mm.
Now, for me, different is no more than just different.
Hmm.
So, I mean, my book, my podcast, my Facebook page, it's all based around the tagline, a different way of seeing. I see myself as using different tools and different techniques to do things that I did when I had my sight.
Yeah.
And different is not less. It is just different.
Yeah.
Like people have different colored eyes,
Yeah.
different colored hair.
If anything,
And
if you flip the
mhm,
coin in decision making, different is better.
better.
Just not
Yes.
bad. It is actually better.
So why can't we see that when we're talking about inclusion, when we're talking about disability?
Agreed. Agreed.
Why do those barriers exist?
Do you have a hypothesis? Not to put you on the spot, Lois.
People in marginalized groups of any kind is that the stereotypes that have been built up over years, decades, centuries
Mm,
are so pervasive
mm.
that people struggle to see beyond them. Okay.
Going back one step, when you were saying around, say, chronic illness and vision,
Mhm,
where they can be assigned as a disability if you're filling out a form, right? You know, if you go into an organization and they have a form, do you have a disability? And there's a tick box, or they might be more explicit and list them all out, and you can
mhm.
just declare them or disclose them. If you don't identify as having disability, do you tick the box?
That's a really tough one. And I think, again, it's contextual. But I think it also depends on the individual person. It depends on the job. It depends on that. There's so many different factors.
Yeah.
I'm not certain that it is easy to give a single clear answer on that.
I mean, I do coach organizations to say the disclosure number on percentage of your workforce having a disability is very highly likely to be a lot less than its actual number.
I've heard of enough people who don't want to disclose because they are anxious that it would mean that they are victimized
Mhm.
within the workplace.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to experience that.
Or excluded from the recruitment process and even getting a foot in the
Yes,
door.
yes,
It's important for organizations to understand their workforce, but you have to also understand the complexity that you're navigating. So, whether
yes.
it's around fear of disclosure, whether it's self identity and actually just not identifying as that, it's just part
Mhm.
of them. I just think I mean, that is a whole episode of a podcast in itself.
I think even explaining your reasons for gathering that data
hmm
can be helpful.
Yeah. So, these are the two steps forward now where we just sort of pause for a moment was around, the biggest barrier that we face, possibly based on your hypotheses, is the stereotypes, the embedded stigmas associated with each of the identities. If there was only one small step that someone could take to move forward, to start breaking down those barriers, what do you reckon your advice would be?
Cultivate open mindedness.
How do we do that, Lois?
It's related to emotional intelligence. It's related to respect. It's related to the understanding that, going back to what I said earlier, that difference is nothing more than difference. Because all of those factors and the power of diversity. Because if we start seeing that difference can be a good thing, can be beneficial, if we look at ourselves and other people with respect and open mindedly, where we are not automatically blinkered by the stereotypes that are out there in society, then it gives space for thought.
Do you have any advice at the individual level how I can develop my open mindedness and hold myself to account for it?
I think that if you have a tendency to look at someone and make assumptions,
Mm,
just to be aware that you're doing it.
mm,
Self-awareness is a really, really important thing.
mm.
And it is often instinctive that we leap to a conclusion. We leap up that ladder of inference and go, this equals that,
Mm-hmm.
without questioning it. So maybe curiosity,
Yeah.
cultivate curiosity.
Assumptions are the enemy of inclusion. All right. So check in with ourselves, question the assumptions that we're making, and seek, like you say, curiosity. Seek to learn and understand from people that are different to you. The
Yes.
value that brings to you, your life, and your perspective of the world. I mean, the privilege I have, Lois, of getting to interview people like you for this podcast. I can't tell you how much it brings to my life.
But you wouldn't be doing it if you weren't curious to learn more. And
Sure.
even that in itself is a step that, sadly, not enough people are making.
Mm. So how do we inspire people to do that? To want to learn more? I mean, that can just be a rhetorical question. There's not necessarily an answer to that one.
Yeah, I was thinking more about how we prevent that from happening,
Yeah,
because
okay.
sadly we don't really listen and engage if we are told we must do
Mhm.
so.
Mhm.
And I think that I don't want to use the word militancy, but that there's the law of relativity that says for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And I'm reminded of that if we sometimes if you try to push people too far, they push back,
Mhm.
and that
Mhm.
builds more resistance.
Yep.
So for me, I think it's more about engaging in shared experience, common experience, the humanity, the what we have in common,
Yeah.
rather than looking at our differences.
Yeah. I just want to pick up on one thing that you sparked an
Mm,
idea. I love how you said how can we prevent people from stopping being curious? I mean, they want your words. I'm sort of paraphrasing here
mm,
because if you think about it, as children are curious. They just inherently are. At some point, we must iron that out of them. I don't know. And that's how we end up with people feeling safe in their own knowledge without expanding it on an ongoing basis. How do we prevent that from happening? So that can literally be a rhetorical one that we can finish the episode on. Lois, I want to
mm.
thank you so much. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours on this. So I'd love to stay in contact. And if anyone would like
Yeah.
to get in contact with you, how are you bringing your magic to the world?
The work that I do and how I show up in the world, I'm pretty much doing whatever I can to share my stories, to share my reality. I have published 6 books, which
Wow.
are all available on Amazon, just
Mhm.
under the name Lois Strachan. I have a website, loisstrachan.com, and I have a podcast, which is called A Different Way of Seeing. And primarily, I also work as a disability coach. And that's where I think the magic truly happens. Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to put all of the links to everything that you've mentioned in the description of the podcast so that people can find you.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Now, thank you again, Lois. What a fabulous conversation and so many wonderful insights.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Liz.